Well, hello and welcome to another Spatial-Next blockchain conversation. I say conversation because more often than not you listen to me talking, but today I've invited a guest. In fact, I've invited Rene Rubalcava from Esri, who I met in Palm Springs just recently, and we had a lengthy conversation around blockchain and some of the work that he's done in testing out the blockchain with ArcGIS and geospatial data. So it's a fascinating conversation. It's pretty far ranging. We've tried to keep it not too technical, but we'll jump into some technology for those that are sort of in the development community, since Rene is a developer at Esri. But I think you'll enjoy the conversation, and we touch on all sorts of aspects of the blockchain, all very related to our world of geospatial. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Well, it's wonderful to have a guest on to talk about geospatial and crypto on the blockchain. But before we begin, just let me get to tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name's Rene Rubalcava. I'm a software dev on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript team at Esri. So I work with the GeoDev on a regular basis on the API. I also work a lot with users and customers to kind of get them get their stuff working and get everything off the ground.
And I think, I mean, I found you, Rene, and it was another. I'd love to see you in Palm Springs at the Esri conferences just recently. But I picked up on your work in blockchain because I've seen you share a number of videos talking about ArcGIS and the blockchain, which were really caught my attention.
Yeah, so I actually do a lot of content, been blogging for a lot of years and videos for a lot of years, and blockchain stuff is something that I've gotten much more interested in the past year or two. I did do some stuff in it a few years ago, but at the time it was more like I didn't really find many use cases for it at the time. I was very much a skeptic at that point, right? I heard a lot of the same pitches for blockchain and stuff. Nothing really too exciting in terms of what I thought anyway would be useful. But just in the, like I said, past couple of years, I've gotten a lot more interested in it. I've seen a lot more utility of stuff come out of it for different projects and stuff. So I think it's a lot of really interesting stuff going on these days in that space, right?
Yeah, and we're going to dive deeper into that in this conversation. So I'm excited to ask the list of questions I've got for you, and there's many more I could have added to the list. But I think probably if I think about the audience that's watching this, we've got to have a geospatial audience. People that have probably touched on, they hear about crypto, they hear about blockchain, they hear about Web3, they hear about this terminology without fully understanding it. So maybe we could just start at a high level and talk about what is the blockchain?
Right. So I mean, the blockchain and the different blockchains that are out there are pretty much decentralized databases. Essentially, what they are. They're not very efficient databases. I think that's like something that people should be aware of. But the idea is that they're decentralized. There's no, in most cases, there's not like a single entity that controls a particular blockchain, right? So the most popular being Bitcoin, which is been around for quite a long time. I think the first time I heard about Bitcoin was probably about 2010, 2011 or so. And I was at the time doing like these forums and boards where you like trade computer hardware and stuff, and you sell a video card or something like that for a few Bitcoin and stuff like that. So, those were just some fun times of playing around with stuff. So, but like I said, it's not necessarily an efficient distributed database, but it's pretty much a distributed system, right? Where you can store data on the blockchain, transactions and stuff like that, which is really neat. And then I think where things really boomed was when Ethereum came out. Ethereum kind of introduced this whole idea of, I think, more utility for using the blockchain for stuff, because we start writing smart contracts and everything and doing a lot more work in that regard. So
okay. So let's just step back. So I think of distributed databases like I think of the original foundation of the internet. If we have all that data on one computer and gets blown up, then we've lost everything. So if we distribute everything across this network, if this one gets blown up, we got stuff over here. It's the same notion within distributed databases. And there's also this notion of trust as well, these public and private keys, which means that it's impossible for people to actually manipulate something that's on the blockchain.
Yeah, right. Because once you've deployed something to the blockchain, it is there forever. It cannot be changed, right? Now, that's not to say that you can't build a smart contract and deploy it without it having like maybe an update function that would change some internal properties. Maybe like you could change ownership or something like that of the contract, or change participants to the contract. Something. Those are the kind of updates you can do, but you can't actually change the code of the contract. There's like a you have to deploy a whole new contract if you want to do that, and there are ways that you can like migrate, say, addresses from one contract to another if you've built that functionality into the contract. Right? There's a lot of um, if you're writing smart contracts, there's a lot of care that needs to go into making sure that they work correctly. And I think that's one thing that that get into that realm need to really be careful of if you deploy into at mainnet. And then I'm going to say mainnet, and people that don't know, this is basically like your staging, development, and production servers, right? There's a test net for all these blockchains that you can deploy to, and the test net is just a completely fake network that you can just deploy to. Nothing there is critical. It's still like just there, exist. And then like a staging could be like a local blockchain. I could run the Ethereum blockchain on my computer that I can interact with, and it'll behave the same way as a production one, much faster, that I can test my contracts with. And then when I'm ready to go and I've done all of my testing, I can deploy to mainnet, right? So there, like I said, there is that trust there because now I've got my keys, I've got my account, you could say, and then the Web3 part, I guess, comes into play when you start looking at your interaction with the blockchain, right? So this is where I think a lot of the stuff is today, where you now can authenticate essentially using your wallet address, using a browser extension like MetaMask is a super popular one. There's actually a few others as well. And you can have apps on your phone even that will have built-in browsers to do stuff like this. And you authenticate via your account. And you're like the only one now that has access to do whatever it is there. And you're trusting that whatever you're interacting with is valid and it's going to do what you want it to do, right? So.
And I'm going to point folks who are listening to this that don't know what wallets are to. There's lots of places to read about this. We're not going to dive into the details of those things. So I've got this in my head. I've got this trust layer. I've got the fact that the blockchain is a distributed database, and I think of databases as these places where we store lots and lots of stuff. So two-part question. First of all, what can you store on the blockchain? Second question is, do I therefore replace all my, you said inefficient, do I basically use a blockchain to take all my GIS data and dump it all into the blockchain and off I go? Tell me more about the what can be put on the blockchain and that efficiency question and why you'd never do what I just described.
Yes, right. So when you think about the blockchain, we say it's a distributed system. In your head, you might be thinking, well, that must mean it's very efficient. It's fast and whatnot, and some of them can be up to a point, but you're not going to reach that. So to give you an example, like Bitcoin, I believe is something like 7 transactions per second. That's like its limit. Now, yes, Bitcoin's a bit of the older one. It was designed that way, and Ethereum and stuff can do many more transactions per second, but you're not going to get these thousands of transactions per second. And there are projects working towards that goal, but the idea there being is that the transactions that happen on the blockchain are not necessarily very fast, right? So when we talk about transactions, you'll hear people talk about gas fees. Gas fees is a terminology where you need to provide, on Ethereum, you need to provide that Ethereum is the token for the Ethereum blockchain. You need to provide some Ethereum to pay for gas fees because miners that are they say mining Ethereum. Really what they're doing is they're validating these transactions, right? So you do a transaction and it might require that 50 different miners validate that transaction as valid so that all these distributed networks can validate these transactions and sync the blockchain. That's essentially what they're doing, right? And these miners take a small percentage of whatever gas fees you're paying. So when there's more traffic, there's higher gas fees because more demand. And this has to do with the way, without getting the technicals of it, it has to do with the way the miners can set up priorities for transactions and stuff. So, but the blockchain itself, the more data you try to put on in the blockchain in terms of like a smart contract, the more expensive that transaction is going to be. It to be a larger transaction. So it doesn't really make sense to try and put like a the boundaries for every state in the United States on the blockchain, because it's just going to be too much data to put on there. You might work it so that you could store some points on the blockchain. I think that's like a valid use case, and that's something you might do for, say, vehicle tracking, right? If you are going to have a contract that is applied to a certain vehicle, and now as that vehicle moves, you're going to update the location via that contract every minute or so, type of thing. Not necessarily that might be something you do, but something you could do, right? And I think that's a valid way to do it. You could even store that as paired coordinates or something, and just keep updating it to certain points. Maybe you have the last 100 locations in that contract, type of thing. So data like that, and then working with Solidity, which is like the main language you'd use to write smart contracts. Solidity doesn't necessarily store floating numbers; it just stores straight integers. But the way you work around that is just doing division. You divide by 18,000, or I'm sorry, you divide by like 10,000 to get a decimal place and stuff like that. So that's kind of the work that goes. So when you work with coordinates, you have to kind of decide how precise you want to be, or you can store them as strings. I've done that. I've stored coordinates as strings, and then I reparse them back to numbers when I consume them in an application or something like that. That's the kind of thing you can do. But yeah, it's definitely, blockchain is not something meant to be storing a large amount of data, but you could do a lot of different interaction or validation of data. And I think there's solutions for stuff like that. There's like IPFS, which is a distributed storage solution that's out there, typically used for like images, right? And you'll see that quite a bit. I've never tried using it for data like that, like maybe JSON data or something, which I suppose technically is possible, right? But again, it's just one of those things I haven't really gotten into yet at that point.
So let's just think about, so let me step back for a second. So when if I store data in my Oracle database, traditionally I push that data in, and there's nothing in between me taking my data and pushing it in there, unless someone's sort of validating what I'm pushing into the database. What we're talking about in blockchain is there's a sort of a middleman, these miners, who, when I want to put data onto the blockchain, they have to validate, and we don't need to go into what the actual work is they're doing, but they have to validate this is a legitimate or not legitimate, as the case may be. And there's another piece to this pie which we don't need to talk about, which is proof of work versus proof of, I always forget the second one.
The proof of stake, right? And I think this is where kind of like the stigma of blockchain stuff comes from, because people are so used to hearing about proof of work, which consumes a lot of electricity and stuff like that. And you can't really argue with it. Yes, you're gonna have large like Bitcoin farms doing stuff like that, but that is like, I'd call that maybe like phase one blockchain stuff that's happened, right? And I think a lot of projects recognize that's not really a scalable way of doing it. Just power hungry blockchains, but you have now things that are like proof of stake, where pretty much you just so Ethereum is still technically proof of work right now. Ethereum 2.0 is supposed to be proof of stake. It's been coming for a long time, supposedly coming this year.
Is that Ethereum 2 I read about?
Yeah, Ethereum 2.0 is going to be proof of stake. It's going to do away with that way the validation of stuff works now. But proof of stake just means you put your tokens or whatever into the blockchain and you stake them, and that's just how it's going to work. Cardano works that way. A few other blockchains work that way, and they aren't these power hungry blockchains at this point, right? It's completely different thing you're working with.
So proof of work is a load of miners. It's first across the finishing line. There's loads of guys that are powering forward to try and get and the first person to finish line is the winner. So that's why there was this power being used. Proof of stake is where you actually have some ownership in that protocol, and therefore there are fewer folks, miners, that are actually trying to validate. So that's where the power saving is. So is that
Exactly.
in crude terms
It operates
what it is?
more like on pools and stuff.
Okay.
So
Okay.
a bunch of people pool their ownership together.
Okay. Okay. So then, just stepping back to the value of the data of blockchain. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's a layer of trust. So I've got my big ArcGIS geodatabase here with all my data in it, and so it sits in a traditional database, whatever it might be. I've got this trust layer now, which my geodatabase doesn't sit in. Why ever would I want to use blockchain with a geodatabase? I mean, I know we're stretching, looking at use cases, and there's lots that will come out, but I've got all my data over here. I've got my expensive trust layer here, but there's value in me using a trust layer against a geodatabase. Go a bit further with that thought process.
I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways you could approach that, right? One thing I think I'm interested in is validating who owns what, maybe stored in your database of some sort, whether it's a geodatabase or some other way that you're storing your spatial data. You can validate who has access to what or who has ownership of what via the blockchain, right? So maybe only certain people that have these addresses or wallets are allowed to do edits to that data, right? And that's one thing I've kind of explored, where I open up my web page, I log in via my Web3 account, or whatever you say, and now I can make my edits, and I can validate my edits against a smart contract that's going to go ahead and say this user is authorized to make an edit to this particular service or something like that, right? So I think that's an interesting way to do it. So more of like an authorization way you can do it. Another way might be to kind of get some of that data into the blockchain. And like I said before, I'm thinking more of like points, or maybe kind of like reference data of some sort to validate like a history of who has been making edits, type of thing. I think that's an interesting way to do it. There's been projects in the past that have tried to use the blockchain to validate like new points of interest, right? Like a point of interest database on the blockchain type of thing. And someone would submit a location and say this is a park, for example. And it would require that a handful of people validate that, yes, this is a park, and it gets added as a point of interest into that particular blockchain database or smart contract. And so I think that's an interesting use case for that. There's actually, I think, there is another project out now that's doing some stuff I saw recently that's trying to do something like that for street data, right? Which is pretty interesting when validating, getting references to like street imagery via blockchain transactions, stuff like that, which I think is kind of interesting. Right, so I think there's a lot of different ways people could go with that. One of the ways I think is really interesting right now is like IoT devices, right? So hardware and blockchains are very interesting, because now you get some of this. So like I've got one here. I've got this Pebble tracker, right? This is a GPS, and it's got sensors for humidity, air quality, and whatnot. And the information from here does go to the blockchain. It's very compact. It's very minimal. But like so the data goes on the blockchain, and now you can go ahead and store information for IoT devices, right? Which I think is neat. I think that's a really cool way of doing it. The same can be done for things like RFID data. So maybe you're collecting RFID data via the blockchain and maybe pushing that to your geodatabase, right? So now you've got the truth of source, or the source data lives in the blockchain, but your reference data now lives in your geodatabase, right? So that's like a different route now. So it's like that's not, the geodatabase can go away and updated, or maybe it crashes or something happens catastrophic and you've lost all that data there, well, you just pull it back from the blockchain again, because it'll always exist in the blockchain no matter what. So you can now pull that data out of there and get it back into whatever you need to do. I think that's pretty interesting, right? And I think that's where you'll see projects doing stuff working with like supply chain issues and asset management, where the source of the data ends up in the blockchain. And like I said, it's very minimal, compact, but then you can start referencing that data inside GIS systems and consume them that way. So normal users don't need to have knowledge of using wallets, or creating a wallet and stuff and memorizing these 24 words to private keys. They just access directly from a geodatabase that it has some back-end service that someone's written to pull data off the blockchain into it, right? Now you can consume it that way. I think that is interesting use case.
That's really interesting. That's one. Well, maybe we'll have to do another webinar and talk about that. That's really fascinating. There's another area that I know, and I'm going to point in this will be posted to YouTube, so I'll point to your blogging and to the two. I've seen two videos you've done, Ray, on technical videos on the blockchain, where you walk through things, and one of them is on. And again, before I ask the question, a point for those listening to this. There's so much talk about the investment side of crypto. Whenever you look at anything, if you do a Google search on crypto, it's all about what's going up, what's going down. It's all of that. But I'm much more interested, I think, this conversation is what's the practical uses of the blockchain rather than the speculative stuff that's going on the finance side. But one of the areas that caught my attention very early when I started looking at blockchain is Chainlink. And you've done some work with Chainlink. So talk about Chainlink, and particularly in relation to geospatial.
Yeah, right. So like everything I was just talking about is like if you're talking directly to the blockchain, like I'm a developer and I'm pulling data off the blockchain, pulling it on ArcGIS server and whatnot, right? But there's another way you can go, because since the blockchain is it's limited to what you can access inside itself. It has no access to the outside world. It doesn't know anything about Google or anything like that. So Chainlink is what's called an oracle. And an oracle is a way that you can write smart contracts that can talk to outside information, right? Now, when you write the contract is still non-updatable. You can't change the code or anything like that. You could maybe have, like I said, you provide update functions that might change the URL that it's going to talk to or something. Either way, what you can do is that I can call a Chainlink contract, and I can ask that contract, hey, well, the most popular one today is, hey, can you give me the latest stock price information, right? So that Chainlink contract is going to go out, pull that information from somewhere, and then provide it to my smart contracts. Now, I have a smart contract that maybe is written to buy certain stocks when it hits a certain level, and it's going to do that kind of work for me via like a Chainlink thing, right? And that contract is just going to, all it's going to update is like how much money have I lost or how much money have I gained, for example, right? So that's kind of the thing a smart contract in that case could do. When you talk about using it for something like geospatial, I think what's interesting is that maybe I have, we talked about smart contracts that can validate editing of geodata in some way. So maybe what I want to do is I want to add a point to a particular service, but first I need to validate that that point is within a certain distance of some other features. Okay, so in the contract, I can do that. I can have a contract that takes coordinates, calls a Chainlink contract, and that Chainlink service is going to go out there and do like a geofence or validate. I can do whatever I want in there, because at that point I can call an API I've written that is maybe written in Python or something like that, that doesn't know anything about blockchain or something like that. And it's just going to do this processing for me, return the results back to that Chainlink Oracle contract I wrote. And then that Oracle contract is going to pass that data back to my smart contract. And it's that talking between the Chainlink contract and your blockchain contract, where you're going to do the work of like minimizing the amount of data that comes back and forth, right? Because like we've talked about transactions stuff on the blockchain, so you're going to minimize that amount of data goes back and forth. But whatever I'm doing over here in the API land, Can be as much as I want. Can be as complicated as I need it to be, or do as much work as I need it to be, because that's not happening on the blockchain. It's happening completely outside of there. So this is where something like Chainlink comes into play, and that works on Ethereum. It works on some other blockchains. Blockchains like Cardano have different oracles. I think Charlie with a 3, Charlie 3 is an oracle that's available on the Cardano. But yeah, right now, Chainlink is probably the most popular one that you can use. They've got really great tutorials. You can run a local Chainlink server on your machine in Docker. The instructions are set up and everything pretty well for you to get that set up, and it's great. I'm a big fan. I think it's a really great way to look at ways that you can do some geospatial stuff with smart contracts, because there's a lot you can do. Like say, if you want to say you want to populate your smart contract, the latest population data, and it's based on a location, maybe a city your contract knows about, and it can just update that data on a periodic basis. Every time a new census data comes out, it's going to update population numbers in the contract, and that might affect other stuff that happens inside your contract as well. You talk about like I know we've talked before about like insurance stuff. So maybe you have a contract for insurance purposes of some sort, and maybe I'm not exactly sure what the insurance would be for. Maybe it's for your house, for example, right? It's a smart contract that your insurance company is using for your home, and it can use a Chainlink Oracle to pull in the latest statistics for, you know, maybe weather in your area that could impact damage to your home. Maybe you live in an area where there's a high tornado risk type of thing, and that can impact your cost of insurance in some way. I don't know how insurance works. It's not my field, but it could pull in all these different kinds of information to calculate data that you need for that particular contract.
That's, you know, yeah, exactly. And I was thinking like weather events. I mean, there was a good Mark Cuban used an example of if he's got a basketball team, I think in tech. I'm not very good at basketball. He owns a team, and he said if there's certain weather conditions and he has to cancel the game, he could have a smart contract that is an agreement on that, and a service could provide directly the data to the smart contract. It says, yeah, we've hit that threshold, you get your payout from the contract. But where I was going to go actually with that was, it's a couple of things. It's that notion of automation that I get in my head. So we're now moving into, you know, there's sort of, I believe we're at an inflection point with geospatial. Some of that's related to, we're now collecting data we could never collect before through these miniaturized sensors. So there's IoT, that's, you know, all of the levels from space economy down to aerial, down to drones, down to terrestrial data collection. You know, with so much data we're collecting, so many different types. We're also now, so that's automated mass data collection. We've also got now the ability to, with machine learning and AI, which are overblown. I know there's so much talk about it, but the practical application of it is still small, relatively, because we have to build the algorithm, the training data, all that good stuff. We don't have to go there. But we can automate the process of processing and analyzing that data. So, you know, there's another automation piece. There's no human there. There's the data collection. We're not manually doing it anymore. There's the automation of the algorithm that does work against that data and processing it. The other piece is the business component, which is a smart contract. So if I have a smart contract, I don't have a team of people that are organizing the contract, writing the contract. It's a simple piece of code that sits on the blockchain that says, we have agreed on this. And I think with the whole idea of oracles, that automates a process of something that sits on the blockchain that can call out to a service from a service provider, a geospatial service provider that has data they've aggregated, they've processed it, made it machine learning, boom. So you've got no people in the mix. It's all automated. So to me, it's huge. And I think the other piece to that I was going to add is GIS has been very much focused on maps and visualization and people involved, and that's in general, that's sort of the IT world, but we're particularly focused on the map. I've always been interested in the fact that GIS is really all about the data. It's not really about the map. The map's just an output. It's an intuitive output, but it's about the data. And I think the data services, which is inherently geospatial, is kind of what we're talking about, and that's the big opportunity. And I think particularly in the commercial sector, which GIS hasn't penetrated in an enormous way, as we start thinking about geospatial, you know, finance and supply chain and all the things that fit within that commercial world, this may be a place where we can start moving our skills, our insight, all the tools that we've built into the commercial world without ever talking about a map anymore. Nothing against maps. It's just the value isn't fully realized in the commercial sector. And I wonder if oracles and this kind of world opens up an opportunity for companies to start building geospatial services that provide answers back to smart contracts.
I think so, and I think that's like I think Oracle is probably the biggest area that people that are interested in geospatial can dive into, because, like I said, you pretty much build your own services and APIs that the oracles are going to access to do the work and provide that information to whoever wants to use it. Right. So let's say, for example, I think like we talk about asset management, right? So maybe some RFIDs devices on trucks transporting stuff across the country, or transporting on a plane or something like that. And you want to validate that it is en route somewhere, right? So that goes through an Oracle, because you're not you don't store route data like that in the blockchain, but that could go from events, like I said, and that's, we haven't even talked about, but like in smart contracts, you have events, right? So when something happens, you can trigger something else to happen. So when a location gets updated on the contract, you can trigger a call to the Oracle and validate that that particular device or truck or plane, whatever, is en route the way it should be, or is within the area that it should be, and then validate that against, send it back to the blockchain to say, yes, this is now a valid route, or whatever it might be, right? And I think that's the way that people that are interested in this can dive in, because, like I said, working with the blockchain directly, you're kind of, when coming from our world of working with GIS data and spatial data and everything like that, you're just used to kind of like having tons and tons of data that you can work with and do whatever you want to. And you have to be very, you're a lot more efficient in writing your code and stuff like that when you're dealing with blockchain stuff, because even iterating over data sets in a contract can be expensive, right? Depending on what you're doing and stuff like that. So you want to kind of minimize that kind of work and stuff like that, and just make it more efficient that way and validate things. So I think that, like I said, I think Oracles really is a cool place for people to dive into. It was really where I started looking at that. I think started to click for me in terms of how you can do all this different kinds of integration across the board with spatial data and blockchain stuff, and then started looking at different projects that do some interesting things, right? Like I think I had mentioned to you before, it's a VeChain. VeChain is a really neat project out there that has practical applications. They deal with supply chains and the produce distribution and stuff like that. So I think those are very good utility projects. IoTex, which is the little GPS device I had here, that's IoTex blockchain. It deals with IoT devices. That's kind of what it's built for, is working with those devices. It's, the transactions are very fast, they're very efficient and stuff on that particular blockchain, so it works out pretty well. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really good projects out there that are approaching more utility than just looking at, like, the financial aspect of crypto and blockchain, everything like that.
So then there's a couple of other topics. I don't want to go too long on this, because we may have to do a second follow-up on this one, really. But the first, so when I was at the Palm Springs, I asked Katie, who's sort of working on the sort of the small business side of the startup world within Esri, if there's anyone she knew that were doing working on the blockchain, and she came up with a couple, but in general terms, she said there's not many folks that I know that are in that group that are doing that work. So looking at the Esri universe and partners within the Esri world, those that are established, those that are maybe looking at startups, what does it look like for one of them to start thinking about blockchain? I mean, this is where I'm going to. This is particularly from a development perspective. We don't need to get too much into the weeds of development, but if I've got a service, for example, that provides geospatial data that I'm selling in a particular way, can I extend my work in that area? Can I start a new company that's sitting on top of blockchain? And if I do, technically, is it incredibly complex to have to, what's the requirements to actually start something, build something on the blockchain that would ultimately either extend my company's offerings or allow me to join the Esri startup program as a blockchain geospatial company? I mean, so I'm asking it in a huge way, but I'm really trying to get to the technicalities of what it's like for a company to think about going down this route.
Yeah, so I think it'd be really interesting. Like I said, I think the if you have existing services and APIs that work with geospatial in any way, I think you can definitely dive in and look at using Chainlink and or other oracles to provide access to that API. 'Cause that's essentially what Chainlink. You read the docs and everything. That's essentially what they do. They allow you a way to provide access to any other smart contracts that might want that data in some way. Now, it's not up to you to write the smart contracts that are accessing the data. That's the the users and those developers' ways to do it. You're just providing basically a proxy for your API via a Chainlink oracle that gives you access to a whole new array of possible users at that point that might want access to that data, right? And then it really depends on the business. This is in terms of growth, right? Now it turns on what businesses are going to want to consume that data in some way.
Right.
And I think we're still fairly early on in terms of like enterprise and business applications using things like that. But there are companies that dive into stuff like that. I think I've heard Walmart's name thrown around a lot of looking into it, right? I think Amazon might also have some R&D stuff into blockchain stuff. At Esri, we don't really have people working on that at the moment. There's a couple people that are interested. I've actually talked to people in the office and stuff like that that are interested in like different applications like that. But it's more just kind of, we're discussing and stuff like that, and I'm not really sure what applications we could do at Esri for something like that. I can't really speak to it, but I think for other
Esri
people
could be the foundation upon which this is built. I'm a weather service. I mean, I think AccuWeather might be have got an Oracle, or at least they're providing services. So as an Esri partner, which I think they are aware of, they take what they're already doing and they make an offering to, maybe they build a relationship with an insurance company to say, a new blockchain-based insurance company to say, we can provide the data that you need for your your insurance smart contract. So maybe it opens up the conversation between geospatial providers that sit on top of ArcGIS,
exactly,
to provide those services to an insurance company. That's a modern insurance company that's built on the blockchain. I mean, is that? Do you think that's the avenue these guys might think about going down?
I think so. I think that's a super exciting way to look at it, because when you look at all the different startups and stuff that are coming out, people are just coming up with these ideas and ways to use different technologies and stuff like that, and getting them off the ground. It's just going to take a push or a change in the way people do their business or their work or anything like that to really get that going. But I think if someone were to do it right, I think if someone provided real value to that, like a modern, insurance company that they can espouse the fact that, you don't have to deal with a claims agent or something like that to file your claims, something like that, because it's all built into the contract. Everything is there for you to see and validate against, right? It's not like there's someone making a decision on terms of like, well, because this happened and this happened, I have the purview to say that I can't really approve this claim or whatever, because the contract determines all of that, right? So I think that's a value that could be added to it. So I think if there was a startup like that did all that kind of work, I think it'd be really cool. I love talking with all the different startups at Esri that come through, and I get the chance to talk to them at the like UCs and dev summits, stuff like that. I just try and kind of go around and see who's doing what. And we have had startups that have done some blockchain work and stuff like that. It's been a while. Like I said, we haven't really had in-person conferences too much, just dev summit. But yeah, I think the last maybe the UC before we went on lockdown, I was able to talk to a startup that was doing some blockchain work, and that's some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So two last questions. The first one is from a technical perspective, and I've watched both your videos on how first one was a pure blockchain smart contract one, and then there's an Oracle's one. Developers watching this, how complex was it for you to figure all that stuff out?
I think the straight contract communication, like the Web3 using MetaMask, and there's a Web3 library people can use and everything to build apps. That was pretty straightforward, right? That one wasn't too complicated. If you're completely new to it, probably the most difficult thing is setting up like a local blockchain or connecting to a test net to do the work kind of thing. So when I did that, I had a couple of comments of people like, "Oh, well, that one transaction validation alone would probably cost me like $50 just to validate that." And that's true. On the main net Ethereum, yes, it would be like a $50 validation. Test net doesn't matter. So that was probably like the easiest one to do. The Chainlink one, I don't want to say it's complicated, but I did have issues setting up the Chainlink and everything, and some things weren't working as the way I expected them to work and stuff. So that was probably the most complicated one, but the documentation on Chainlink docs is really, really good. I only had one issue in terms of like setup, which was the Docker, because I don't know how to use Docker really. So I had to look up some stuff to get it set up correctly the way I needed it. And then after I got that done, I had some issues with my smart contracts I was deploying to my Chainlink Oracle that I just because I was unfamiliar with the way some stuff worked. But I'll say this, I think Chainlink has one of the best communities out there in terms of getting help. They have a really great Discord. They have a great Twitter, social media that you can interact with and ask questions and stuff. They do a lot of hackathons, right? So if you're ever looking for a blockchain or crypto hackathon, Chainlink's like involved in tons of them that I see out there. They have tons of videos. Actually, there is a 16-hour blockchain course done by a Chainlink advocate, that developer advocate. It's not completely Chainlink focused. There's like a good portion of it is, but it's like a complete blockchain course that's really good that I did that I liked a lot.
So yeah, is it a course you have to pay for?
No, it's completely free. It's on
Completely
YouTube.
free.
It's a free Code Camp
Wow.
YouTube channel, and it's just a course went on there. But yeah, like for Chainlink, there's tons and tons of really great resources, a lot of really great help. On, like I said, the Discord's where I go for help because it's just easiest for me to ask quick questions like that, and they were really helpful for me to get it done. And it just had more with me to understand exactly what I needed my contract to do. Because when you, and to get a little bit of technical on it, when you write a contract for Chainlink, you have to give it a little bit of Link and a little bit of Ethereum so it could do the work it needs to do, just to do transactions. And I was having issues making sure I sent the right amount of Chainlink and the right amount of Ethereum to do stuff. And yeah, I kind of messed that up the first few times, but it was fine. I got it working and everything worked great after that.
Yeah. Fascinating. So two last things to finish with, and they're both actually, it's really about the future. So I'm interested in your thoughts on what the future looks like with blockchain. I wanted to touch on Web3 and actually the metaverse. I think the metaverse is interesting, but overblown in the sense that we're rebuilding digitally the world outside and inside. So that's all very fundamentally geospatial, 3D, real time, all of that stuff. So I think there's an interesting metaverse conversation. Maybe we say that another day. The Web3 stuff, I heard someone say the other day that doesn't like the term Web3 because it suggests that there's Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, and Web 3 is a continuation of the web we've got now. But Web 3 is a quite different conceptual model. Well, a practical model. I mean, any comment on that?
I guess I see it a lot, especially on social media, people that are really turned off by the whole Web3 moniker and stuff. And I guess, the basic description is that Web 1 was just the initial mid-90s kind of internet and stuff, and then Web 2 was really this whole I think like e-commerce push or something. I'm not sure what the description of Web 2 is, but I think when you think of Web 3, it's really just, it is the existing stuff that we do now, but now you're interacting with decentralized information this way. We're interacting with decentralized databases and stuff that are not part of the internet, right? They're outside the blockchain and stuff like that, but you're doing some interaction with them in some way. And I think that's where the Web3 stuff is. But I think there's a lot of really cool opportunities for people to work on that and do some pretty interesting things like we've talked about. Because, at the end of the day, I mean, you can't really knock a new tech just because you're not familiar with it or know all the ins and outs of it. and stuff. You've got to really kind of give it a chance and look at what it can do. Like I said, we've talked about there's different ways you can use it in terms of like authenticating users or validating data, or this whole trust thing with the contracts and stuff that you can do with Web3, which I think is interesting. And yes, right now there is like everyone's in it for like financial purposes, financial gain or something like that. There's a lot of that out there, but I think over time we're going to see that kind of be secondary to real utility to what people can do with it. Right? There's going to be a lot out there, and it's like the early days of like barbecue.com, right? Like you buy random domain names and you're able to sell them off for crazy amounts of money. You can't do that today. And I think you'll see that with blockchain and Web3 down the road as well. Like it's not going to be just grabbing all this different tokens and putting new projects out and automatically expecting to make a ton of money type of thing, right? I think it's going to be a whole new way to, well, I think it's going to grow and mature and stuff to a way to actually have some practical applications and use for things. And that's going to depend a lot on developers and people working on various projects and stuff, and adoption, right? I think adoption is going to be huge down the road, but the adoption is not going to come until you have some actual real utility and stuff. And that there's a lot of blockchains working on improving things like transactions, improving storage of data in some ways, right? Like I said, there's IPFS is a great decentralized storage solution, but again, it's not perfect. But there might be something else coming out down the road. But yeah, I think there's a lot that could happen there, right? And I'm not ready to just say that it's a fad and stuff, it's going to go away or like that. I'm here to like jump in and learn as much as I can and try all kinds of different stuff and find out what people are working on. I think there's a lot of really good growth there.
Yeah, so that's a good segue, and you've sort of answered chunk of what I was going to ask you. So I mean, the future. I listen to, like, I really like there's a guy called Raoul Pal who's got an organization called Real Vision, and he does lots of free lots of free content, but it's all talking about the future of blockchain and all the NFTs and all of the pieces that make up the puzzle. He says we're in an absolutely transformational period like we've never seen before in our lives. So he's so totally bullish on things. Then you have the people who are skeptics who say it's a fad, like you just mentioned there. My perspective is that we're at a very early stage of something that is potentially enormous, but we don't quite know where it's going to go to. And like you just said there, the actual use of the blockchain is still very early. People are too much hype about nothing. But you can see there's a lot of money pouring, and you can see how it potentially changes business models. So I lean towards the fact it's transformational. What are your sense? I mean, you said that you don't believe it's a fad, you're following it, but do you think this is going to really change our world, how we do business, how we operate?
I think so. I think we're going to see in like maybe 10, 15 years time, a lot of different applications on blockchain usage in terms of like enterprise adoption among different companies. I think without getting, and we'll probably have time to get into NFTs thing and stuff like that, but just I think there's a lot of different ways that those can be adopted for I think music and artists and stuff. There's a lot of really cool projects doing stuff like that out there, and that people can talk about the whole ownership and stuff like that. I mean, it's interesting. It's a really great and interesting way to talk about things. And I mean, I could be completely wrong. And if I'm completely wrong and in 10 years all this has gone away, then fine. Right? I was wrong. No big deal. I'll admit it at that point. But right now, I don't think I am. I think we're going to see real usage come out of it at some point like that. It's like, the early days of the internet. No one thought that was going anywhere for a long time until it blew up. And then all of a sudden it blew up. And it's just modern day usage. It's part of our everyday lives at this point. And I think at some point it'll be like that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's great to have this conversation, Rene. We'll have to have more of these. I think it's an interesting. People hear a lot about it, but I'm always thinking about how it could be transformational to our world of GIS and geospatial. I sense that there's a lot there. but we're still at a very early stage. So maybe we'll look back at this conversation in 10 years and say, God, look what we were talking about there. We were completely wrong. Oh my gosh, we were so early and we got it so right. You know, I hope it's the latter, but we'll find that out.
Like, it may not be the best storage solution for spatial data, but I think there's a way you can definitely integrate it for validating data, or measuring or something like that, right? I think there's definitely ways to use it in that space, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, thanks for your time on this, Rene. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I think this will be part one of a number of conversations we'll have around this as all this stuff evolves. But thanks for your time today.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Geospatial-Next channel. We're focused here on understanding the future of geospatial. That's both how we get to mainstream adoption of the technology and data, and how we start using blockchain and crypto to move things forward. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.